Tonight, we start with that breaking news. Our first look at the search warrant used to seize those highly classified documents the FBI found inside former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. That unprecedented search turning up sensitive documents, 4 even labeled top secret and meant to be viewed only in highly secured facilities. Tonight, what we're finding out about what else was found, including 27 boxes, information about the president of France, clemency papers for top Trump confidant Roger Stone, and binders of photos. All of it fueling questions tonight about what will happen next, with a document stating agents were searching for evidence of violating 3 laws, including part of the Espionage Act. Tonight's revelation bookending a week that began with that hours-long search. We've got it all covered tonight, and we begin with Kelly O'Donnell in Washington.
Tonight, government secrets recovered, NBC News obtained, and later a federal magistrate unsealed the search and seizure warrant that made history this week, as FBI agents removed 11 sets of classified documents from the Florida estate of former President Donald Trump. His lawyer signed the receipt that lists each box removed. Among the 27 boxes seized, a set of documents marked top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. That's material that can be only viewed in a secure facility where no cell phones are permitted, a room with special defenses designed to prevent foreign eavesdropping. Other documents removed were marked at different security levels: top secret, secret, and confidential. An alarming detail. The warrant said FBI agents were pursuing national defense information. The court filing shows investigators had probable cause related to 3 federal laws, including violations of the Espionage Act.
It's a statute that has been used in prior criminal prosecutions of individuals who are in unlawful possession of classified information. And that's a pretty shocking thing to see undergirding a search warrant focused on a former president of the United States.
The Washington Post reports that agents were looking for classified documents about nuclear weapons, according to people familiar with the investigation. In a social media post, the former president has disputed that, stating, "Nuclear weapons issue is a hoax. Consequential events never seen before. A former president and his private enclave under scrutiny." An attorney general saying he signed off on the search.
I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant.
The court authorized a broad search of the 17-acre estate, covering all storage rooms and all other rooms, all structures or buildings on the estate, available to be used by F. POTUS, the former president, and his staff, but excluded areas occupied by private club members. While most seized items are described with just a box number, a few reveal more, like this: an executive grant of clemency for Roger Stone, info regarding the president of France, 2 binders of photos, and 1 handwritten note. In a statement, former President Trump responds, "It was all declassified," adding they could have had it anytime they wanted without playing politics.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell joins us now from the White House. And Kelly, the FBI now has their documents back. And I guess the big question tonight, is that it? Was that their goal, or to pursue charges?
To be determined. So investigators must review what's inside all these boxes. Is it enough that government property has been returned the hard way?
Unfucking believable. I told these 2 high school kids.
Will we learn why the former president kept these things? The affidavit in this matter is still sealed, and that contains much more about what investigators were pursuing and where this might lead. Tom?
All right, still so many questions tonight. Kelly O'Donnell leading us off from the White House. I want to bring in now our justice correspondent, Ken Delaney. And Ken, Kelly touched upon this in her story, but explain to our viewers, what laws does the FBI suspect the former president has broken?
The warrant says the FBI was looking for documents connected to violations of 3 statutes, Tom. One makes it illegal to destroy or conceal records in a federal investigation. A second prohibits the unlawful removal of government materials. And a third, the Espionage Act, makes it a crime to take national defense information with intent to harm the United States. Anyone convicted of any of those crimes could face significant prison time, though it's not clear at all whether the Justice Department intends to charge Trump or anyone else.
And Ken, the former president, as you know, saying tonight he declassified those documents. Does he have a legal argument, and will he need proof?
Many legal scholars say he doesn't have an argument, Tom, because even though the president has the power to declassify documents at will, they believe the declassification has to be documented in some way. They say a former president can't just take home state secrets and claim without evidence that he declassified them when he was in office. But the idea that secrecy rules apply to the president has never been tested in court. And some scholars think Trump could fend off criminal charges by citing his presidential authority. What's noteworthy about the three laws the FBI cites, though, Tom, is that they apply whether or not the records are classified. It's almost as if the Justice Department was anticipating Trump's defense. Tom?
Ken Delaney for us tonight. Ken, we appreciate it.
Donald Trump is losing on his efforts to prosecute his enemies list. New Epstein pictures are coming out. I'm going to get into both of those topics in this legal breakdown. I'm Ari Melber, lawyer and journalist. You can always subscribe for my YouTubes, and I'm going to touch on both these topics, which are related. This is a special weekend update. The failure of Donald Trump to prosecute his enemies is a very important story. Number one, it obviously shows the limits, even with the problems we have at accountability in this country, which are well known, and some of the failures of the government. It shows the limits within the current system. Another way to say that is it shows that some guardrails, some parts of the protections in our system are still working. And so while I think people get busy or move on or say, okay, I guess he didn't get James Comey, what's going on next? It's actually a super important story, and it's one that Donald Trump would like to go away. He would like people to not realize that his threats don't always work, although prosecuting and going after people, even when you fail, can really upset their lives. But the failure for the third time by Donald Trump to get and prosecute Attorney General Letitia James in New York is a huge development. So I want to talk about that a little bit. This is the third round. I've done other breakdowns, and if you follow the news, you've probably heard about how Trump has lost two prosecutors because they didn't even have the job, because the ways they were trying to find loopholes and use temp prosecutors to go after his opponents on a partisan basis was failing. So why three times? Well, first they lost with Lindsay Halligan, who Trump is now trying to reinstall in government, but she was ruled as basically not on the job. She never had the job. Real chutzpah to try to prosecute other people or jail people as a prosecutor when it turns out you're not a prosecutor. And so she and Alina Habba have met that fate. And that first time they failed was because when they disqualified Halligan, there was no one else willing to sign on to what most people clearly in the office at DOJ viewed as a unlawful or baseless prosecution. And so because she was the only name on there, the James case fell apart. Then they tried to bring it again. Now, legally, they can do that, but they failed the second time because the grand jury rejected it. Then they brought it before another grand jury, and this is now the third time. If you've heard the expression, oh, a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich or anything else, there are reasons for that. I want to talk about that for a couple minutes because most people never see the inside of a grand jury room. And in our system, when we think of trials and juries, when we hear that word jury, we usually think of the main event, the trial, 12 people in the box, movies, Law and Order. The grand jury, though, is the earlier step. And if things are working well, you don't hear a lot about it, and you shouldn't have to think about it. But in one part of our system that is positive and has worked over the years, it is the first check on the abuse of government powers. You can go all the way back to the objections to the British king, and we hear about no king's protests today, because if you go back far enough, the government could just snatch you up, imprison you. You had no rights. You go before the founding of the Constitution. The idea of habeas corpus and other developments along the way was that the people would have some rights afforded to them before the government could do that. And so the grand jurors are not the normal jury you see, and like I said, in Law and Order, they're a larger group and they use a lower standard of evidence and they tend to just hear the government, that's the prosecutor side, and say, okay, fine, indict this person. They'll still be able to defend themselves in court later. They get other rights. They may not be convicted. So it's a low bar. And that's why they say you can indict a ham sandwich, because you don't hear from the defense, you don't hear other outside evidence, and it's not designed to do, 50 or 40%. It's designed generally to clear most prosecutions, the vast majority. But there is a check that if the prosecutors basically break their vow or duty and try to bring cases with no evidence that don't clear that low bar, there's a bunch of your peers, normal citizens, who say, hold up, no. So that process has worked now to reject the Trump effort to indict Letitia James twice. That's a huge embarrassment. There's a lot of other stuff going on from Epstein to Venezuela. So I don't know that everyone is focusing on this, but that is just embarrassing. It is a total rejection of this enemies list approach. And it's a reminder of how the guardrails are working. A second point I want to make on that, then I'll turn to Epstein in this update. A second point is that when you look at that, you're looking at regular people. And if you're not a legal or politics junkie and you're called in to a government operation and you're not thinking about this all the time, you tend to feel like you want to go with what you're told. Indeed, I've been around courtrooms and I've found a lot of people, regardless of the background, whatever, they listen to the judge, which makes sense. He's up there with the bailiff, and it's a bit intimidating, kind of on purpose. And so it means something that while we see that people go along with the grand jury process, and they often go along with the prosecutor, we are seeing in this example twice, two different sets of people, the rejection of this overreach, which in a way I think is independence and a type of courage. Contrast that, those regular people, to the elites and the rich and the powerful, whether it's in politics or business, people who run universities and law firms who have all famously capitulated to Donald Trump on abuse of power. It's one thing to say you agree with him on tax policy or whatever. It's another thing where we've seen people who we know disagree with him and have concerns about him trying to take over Wall Street businesses or universities. They have a history of criticizing him, but faced with something that could affect their livelihood and their jobs or whatever, they fold. And a lot of them folded quickly and early this year. And other people have pointed this out. As a journalist, I've interviewed a lot of people who've talked about this, so this isn't some unique and original point, but just think about it, because there's some inspiration there that regular grand jurors say, okay, I'm here to do this job. Wait, the government doesn't have it. And even if there's a lot of bravado, even intimidation, they say no, and they stood up to that. And it's a really clear example that, A, we have a system that still requires this. You cannot get the federal agents to just go arrest someone and detain them without the process. Judges will order them otherwise released. And so you have to go through this process. And then part two, we've got citizens doing their job in the highest sense of the word. And they're hearing the evidence, and if it's not there, they say no. And if they feel that they're in an environment where the government's pushing them or demanding things, they say no. And that's better than a heck of a lot of rich, maybe bubbled elites. So I wanted to kind of hit that point on James. There's some other cases pending. If you're keeping score, in cases that have reached key points, when you count by defendant, Donald Trump is 0-3. Mayor Baraka, who is Jersey, James, who I mentioned, and Comey. If you count total tries, it's higher than that because they've tried 3 times on James. So the enemies list is faltering. There are open cases against Bolton and some other individuals. Point 2, new topic, Epstein. We're following this story closely for a lot of different reasons. There you're seeing that while there wasn't accountability and there were a lot of failures in the system, and I've reported on that and talked about that, more and more evidence is coming to light. And so while it's totally understandable that people say, well, what if it's all redacted? And what if we don't get the whole story? And you got to keep pushing, and pressure's been a part of this. In the last month, we've seen a sea change. Federal law has been rewritten because of the survivors, and originally the Democrats and then some Republicans who joined in to force the House vote. And then all the Republicans in the House pretended they were for it, though we know they were against it because they wouldn't allow the vote. But that law now has led to 3 different judges ruling the grand jury material will come out. That's from both Epstein cases and Maxwell. The Epstein estate has complied, as best we can tell, lawfully with demands for material. That's why we got that huge trove of emails. That's more transparency. It's had impact real world on a bunch of people who had tried to hide or minimize their ties to Epstein, from Harvard President Larry Summers, who worked in the Obama administration, to Steve Bannon, who was, and we saw this in the emails, secretly, furtively trying to rehab Epstein's reputation. Only he can explain why he wanted to do that. But the emails expose more of that. And now we have all these new photos, and it's related because the Congress got the photos lawfully, released some of them, and it shows Donald Trump back in the day, Bannon more recently, and other individuals like Woody Allen and Clinton. So the net is far and wide that the evidence is coming out. And that comes just before the December 19th deadline under that law I mentioned, where the DOJ is supposed to release the material with very narrow exceptions. Even grand jury material, as I mentioned, was not found to be an exception by these 3 judges. So the exceptions are more like things that would be fine as long as they don't abuse that to lie or deceive, protecting survivors' names and things like that. Protecting minors, of course, but not saying you can redact whole documents like some farce and just claim it's those things. And if you redact someone's name, it's a couple words. If you redact a whole page, that would be playing games. And a lot of Republicans now, under pressure, have started to warn DOJ not to do that. So the new round of photos doesn't tell us a ton of backstory. It's more like, you see that Epstein and Bannon were hanging out in sort of a deep way, intimate way, spending enough time together to take selfies in the mirror and the dinners, and you see some of that. The backstory and the extra, more important investigative information, including how Epstein got such lenient treatment, his connections to Republicans and Democrats, a lot of that stuff would come out with a lot more detail when you get the full files. But the photos show that a lot of the legal requests and pressure is working. And the grand jury process shows that that guardrail is missing. So while there's a lot that's been wrong with our system on a lot of levels, and I've done a lot of reporting on that, it is striking to see that with pressure and the change of law, there are things that are working. That's kind of my report on two somewhat related items here. Special extra weekend edition. You can always subscribe to my YouTubes and breakdowns. Leave questions or thoughts in the comments. I do read some of them and reply to some of them. So stay tuned.
President Trump had a series of signal setbacks this week, raising some doubts about his grip on the GOP and his ability to govern in his second term. For analysis, we turn now to Brooks and Capehart. That is New York Times opinion columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart of MS Now. Good to see you both. Let's talk about the latest AP poll that looks at the president's overall approval rating. It's at 36% right now, which is a second-term low he's hit before. And it was lower at times in his first term. But the difference now is his approval on the economy specifically. It's at 31%. I want to put to you what Republican pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson wrote this week. She said, what's crucial to understand about Mr. Trump's poor approval numbers is that unlike his last time in the White House, people now disapprove of him because of the economy, not in spite of it. David, the president continues to insist affordability concerns are a Democratic hoax. Why?
Well, if you look at the raw number, it's the same with Biden. If you look at the raw numbers, he's got a bit of a case. Median real wages after inflation are at their highest level in American history. And then if you look about affordability, real wages are going up like this. Food, clothing, all this stuff is not going up as fast as real wages. The things that are going up really fast are healthcare and education. So those things are going up really fast, and housing in blue cities. So there are some things that are really busting people's budgets. So you got these overall numbers, which are okay, but then when you ask people, consumer sentiment, the University of Michigan survey, it's in the cellar. It's like at historic lows. So people, the economists can tell them they're doing okay, but people say, no, I'm definitely not doing okay. And in this case, the people know more than the economists.
Jonathan, even Republicans I've talked to this week have said he should not call it a hoax. We have to meet people where their concerns are. Is this sort of a gift to Democrats?
Yes. Yes, it is. I mean, at no point did President Biden say to the American people, it's a hoax what they're telling you. You're doing great. He never said that. What the president is doing is trying to convince people